you can start whenever you want.
Okay, yeah. I'm Dr. Briones. I'm originally from Southern California. I studied psychobiology at UCLA for my undergraduate degree, and then I went to Princeton for my PhD in psychology and neuroscience. And now I'm here as a postdoctorate researcher in Garrett Stuber's lab at UW. And this is a male brain, and I think something that some people forget is that there are lots of estrogen receptors in both biologically male and biologically female brains. And we're in the Neurobiology of Addiction, Pain, and Emotion Center, where I really focus on the emotion side of research as it pertains to social behaviors and how we sort of, using a mouse model, how mice discriminate between intruder types based on their different phenotypical characteristics. So looking at coat color and odor to discriminate them against familiar mice, and they'll be more aggressive towards mice that they view as outgroup members. And so I'm trying to use this model as a way to look in the brain of how we are socially biased and how that affects our aggressive behaviors. So being here in the School of Medicine is a really great tool to collaborate with other researchers. The Stuber lab is really close-knit with the Briones lab here across the hall, and both groups sort of work to collaborate on addiction pain-based research. It also is nice to go to conferences like Society for Neuroscience, where you can talk with other scientists at other institutions across the world. I'm very interested in connecting my research to translational research in humans, and how there's a lot of really great social psychology and cognitive neuroscience research looking at fMRI data about how our biases affect our behaviors. There's a task called the IAT that maybe you've taken if you took intro psychology. And then the other part for collaboration, I think it's really important to incorporate animals broadly. So field biologists do a really great job of characterizing primates. Like baboons, for instance, are known to be a very aggressive primate, right? But so are chimpanzees. But baboons are broadly very aggressive, and the reason for that being is when they're born, once they hit puberty, they have to be set out to their own devices and start their own sort of group or tribe, whereas a chimpanzee stays in its home group for life. And so their in-group mentality is really strong. They affiliate with their inner circle so strongly that any out-group chimpanzee that even approaches their camp, they will attack to the death. And so I think that's also a great way to think about how social biases in the brain are strengthened based on our socializations and how the social structure is set up. Yeah, actually that's a funny story. So I'm half Filipino and Salvadoran Mayan. And so I'm the first in my family to go to college, and everyone's like, oh, well, obviously the thing to do is to become a medical doctor, right? And so originally I was a pre-med student at UCLA, and I worked at the UCLA Ronald Reagan Hospital for 2 quarters, and I was so traumatized by the experience that I was like, oh, this isn't for me. I'm not really the medical human facing person. And I happened to land into this lab that studied post-traumatic stress disorder. And it used both going out on site to look, we went to Camp Pendleton down near San Diego, and we collected like blood samples from Special Forces recon trainees. It causes so much of their HPA axis to be hyperadrenaline, like overdrive, so we would collect blood samples from them, do mindfulness training with them to see how that affected their cortisol levels. And so I thought that was really cool. But then the second part of the lab also looked at like a rat model of post-traumatic stress disorder, where they received unpredictable shocks and that they couldn't escape. And then we would test them in a task to see how well they would perform to avoid the shock, or if they would just, what's going to learned helplessness, if they would just accept the shock and take it, as opposed to trying to find an active way to avoid shock. And so once I started getting invested in both of these, I found out that being at the lab bench was where I was more invested. It's like being a pioneer, right? You're like carving a trail through the brain, trying to understand and solve these pieces of a puzzle, which I liked a lot more than being in the hospital space. So that's why I chose the research side of what I'm doing. Yeah, I think what's the community at large for women in science and in neuroscience, specifically from my perspective, has been really strong in some areas and really lacking in others. I've been really fortunate to have very strong women mentors. Both my grad student PhD advisors were both women, Dr. Elizabeth Gould and Dr. Alana Witten. They're incredible. And I was really fortunate to be able to be in both of their labs. And actually, as a grad student, the lab was primarily female. And then I came here, and I'm the only female postdoc in the Stuber lab. And so I think it really does change from place to place. It's definitely something that I didn't expect to like come in and be the only female postdoc, but there are a lot of women grad students in the lab, and I think being able to have affiliative groups, like I'm a part of the grad student like Women in Science and Engineering group at Princeton, and then there's also this Women in Neuroscience called Synapse Women for the like tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania as well. But here I have yet to really like find that niche, but hopefully like it starts growing. Yeah, I think, you know, ever since high school I've been, you know, an historically marginalized, underrepresented person, and when I got here, I actually became really involved in the EDI pharmacology program, so the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion program. And we've been starting to work with local Seattle community centers to do outreach where we bring, you know, a few brain teasers and maybe some brain samples and talk about our work in a very light way to middle schoolers and high schoolers and maybe even some elementary school children in impacted communities in Seattle to really showcase like this is something that you could do, and if that's something that's interesting, like here's a resource for it. We are a resource for you to understand how to get into college and pursue research. I mean, I didn't even know that you could go to get a PhD in anything really, to be honest. I've also done a lot of work with the Association for Filipinos in America doing research, and that's been a really great affiliative group. I've gone to different conferences like SACNAS, it's like Society for American Chicanos and Native Americans. And groups like that are really important. You know, a lot of our structures are built off of already systemically unequal footing, and so how to be able to do something in a space that's already built up on bias is challenging and important to educate everyone and talk about that, have open dialogues about bias and racism in science. You know, not being hard on yourself and expecting to do like amazing cutting edge research right out at the gate. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves very early in life to be like successful in doing already what we think it is what we need to be doing for our careers. I've pivoted so many times and like I've amassed a lot of different experiences, and I think that has informed me much more about what I enjoy to do and what I like to pursue, as opposed to having been like, this is exactly what I wanted and I'm only following down this path. Yeah, so Garrett, the PI of our lab, loves ChatGPT. We have an entire Slack channel dedicated to things we find out about ChatGPT, functions we can do. It is growing stronger each day, and I think so far how I've used it is to really help me sift through literature. I've also had it help me like refine things I write to be more accessible. If you give it a prompt to say like, make this piece of writing I wrote accessible and less jargon, using less jargon, active tense, you know, those sort of things, it has really strengthened my writing, which I think is great. It's definitely, you know, a huge part of neuroscience, especially with these large data sets that are being collected. How do we analyze these really large data sets? How do we find patterns? And I think machine learning is a really useful tool to be able to find things that you wouldn't be able to find yourself without like months and months dedicated to it. Outside of lab, I think it's made me really appreciate and be accepting of how people are in the world. I think as I've gotten deeper into neuroscience, I really am of the camp of we don't have free will, and we are products of our already pre-existing environments, and it's really difficult to undo those things. You don't get to choose the environment that you're brought into, and so being very understanding and empathetic towards how people are and their viewpoints has been helpful for me in my like day-to-day life. Yeah, outside of the lab, I do a lot of different things actually, and I like to keep busy. I play a lot of video games. Oh, I did go to the Benaroya Hall last week for the Seattle Symphony, and they did performances of different Angelo Badalamenti soundtrack songs, and so that's a lot of like David Lynch, Twin Peaks, Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet. Those are really awesome, like weird, sort of scary type things.